Okay, so tonight we are talking about the majesty and beauty of God and the splendor of His children that should come in response. Um, I wanted to do like a sort of a series on the attributes of God, and I don't know quite yet if we're going to do that, but this is something that God really taught me about, and I never really shared it with anyone, and it was very important to me when I came to this sort of epiphany about how we regard worship and being in the presence of God and how we think of God Himself. And so before I get into any teaching, I want to share with you 3 little anecdotes or stories or examples. So bear with me. So some of you may not know this about me, but I'm from Lincoln, Nebraska. Okay, I'm from the Midwest. I'm from arguably one of the most boring states in the entire country. Not a lot happens there. The 3rd most populous state is the Cornhusker Stadium on game days. So it's not an exciting place. But something you may not know about Nebraska is that one of the world's highest rated zoos, like in the whole world, is in Omaha, right? So it's about it's a few hours or an hour. Yeah, it's like an hour and a half away from where I grew up, right? So the Omaha Zoo, it's like a famous zoo. It's massive. It's really cool. And so I moved from there when I was like 7 years old. But every summer I go back and I visit my family there. And every other summer or so we go back to the zoo. We go as a whole family and we go walk through and look at all these animals and all these amazing exhibits they have. And it's mesmerizing. It really is crazy. There are animals you'll see there that otherwise you would never see in your entire life. And it is just a beautiful array of nature, and you just get to go through and just be blown away. And so one of my favorite things is observing and watching my younger cousins, right? Because they are captivated from the moment we walk in to the moment we leave, right? These are kids that are growing up playing Minecraft and with iPads that anytime they're at home or in the car or whatever, they're doing their own thing and they're on technology or on YouTube or whatever. But the moment they walk into this place where they encounter something that they hardly see or something that is rare or special, when they walk in and they go through these exhibits, they are captivated. I mean, faces against the glass, smearing it, laughing the whole time, running ahead to get to the next exhibit, just blown away, shocked. And I am too, but it's different. It's a different kind of shock for me because I've seen these kinds of things. I've seen my fair share of National Geographic, so it's like, oh, that's really cool. Or I've been going since I was their age, so I'm sort of like conditioned to it. But then, seeing these kids view these animals for the first or second or third time in their whole life, and watching the way they behave and observe is amazing, right? Because they are seeing, God's beautiful creation, and in response, they are just eyes glued to the exhibits and watching the creation of God play out before them. And it's amazing to watch. The second story I want to share with you is my first time on an airplane. I think I was 6 years old. I don't remember exactly where we were flying, but I have a picture of it, and I know I'm sitting on the airplane like this. And we had an old video of it on my old computer before it got thrown out of me, like dancing on the airplane and being excited because it was like an airplane. I was scared. I was anxious. I didn't know what was going to happen when we took off. I got the butterflies. I used to call them the tickle swaps when I was a kid. And so I just remember being on this airplane and just being like, my eyes just being glued to the window. And I remember just watching it take off, traveling faster than I probably ever have before. And as we take off into the air, even though I'm overlooking the cornfields of Nebraska, I'm still just like this. Just looking and blown away to look over the expanse of the earth. And just, even though I'm seeing farm and just the most boring view you can possibly imagine, I'm still blown away because I'm seeing more of the earth than I've ever seen at one point in my entire life. And so I'm looking at all of this and I just can't look away the whole time. And in the clouds, I'm just like, wow, this is what clouds look like up close. And so all this creation, man's creation and God's creation together, I was glued to it, blown away by it, mesmerized by it. So much so that I could not look away, that it made me anxious to be able to see that stuff, and that it brought out excitement in me. And the last I want to share with you, I feel like a lot of people have done this, is, when you're in like elementary school and you go into like a planetarium, right? Where you lay on the ground and then you have the whole dome above you and you get to look at all the stars and where all the planets are. And I remember as a kid laying in this thing and just being like, whoa, Like this is what, or in Star Wars, in the second movie when all the kids, like all the Padawans are standing in the room, and Obi-Wan opens up the huge map where you see all the galaxies and it's like zooming in and looking all around, and it's just like this huge array of space, and it's just like this beautiful view, and all the kids' eyes are just like locked in. But like being at elementary school and looking at space in that way for the first time, I remember just being shocked and thinking, whoa, like whoa, that's amazing. And so the reason children are amazed in this way by things that we're more conditioned to, but the reason kids are amazed by these things is because they realize for the first time, or in a new way, that the world is big, that it is much, much bigger than they are. They're blown away because for the first time they're looking at something, seeing something that is much, much more expansive or far-reaching or significant than anything they've ever encountered before. It's a rare experience. It's not something they get to see every day, right? When they're back home, when my cousins are back home in their little Midwestern home and they're playing Minecraft, they don't get to see, a huge group of silverback gorillas, or you get what I'm saying. They don't get to observe these things on a daily basis. It is a rare and special occurrence, and so they know that when they are viewing those things to be locked in, and the amazement, the splendor is an automatic response. And so I want to look at Jesus' words in Matthew 18. And he's talking about, you guys may have heard the phrase childlike faith, right? So at the time, so here's what it says, Matthew 18, 1-4. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus saying, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" And calling to him a child, he put him in the midst of them and said, "Truly, I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven." And so I think it's significant to point out the fact that they're talking about the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. They're talking about the greatness of themselves. They are egocentric, pointing to themselves and thinking, look at me. Which of us is the greatest? Lo and behold, they are standing in the midst of the greatest in all of the universe. And so Jesus' response is, you need to view the world and view God in light of the fact that he is greater than you. Right? In the same way that children are blown away and mesmerized by realizing that the world is bigger than them, we too should be humbled, blown away, and mesmerized by knowing how much bigger than us God is. Right? So the humility of a child childlike faith is not that we don't take our faith seriously, that we don't that we're not careful and considered in doctrine and theology, because that stuff is important. But what it does mean is that there is an unquestioning trust. There's a great spoken word on this by Joseph Solomon. I think it's called it's something about doubt, but it's really good. I listen to it all the time. But you think he basically explains that like his nephew or his niece came up to him after church one day and was so excited about this person Jesus, and there was no questioning. They simply believed because they were told it was true. And so this is the way that we want to believe Jesus is not that we don't consider apologetics and the intricacies of everything and the gray areas of the questions we're answering. But when we look at the truths that Jesus gives us and the Bible gives us, we say, yeah, it's true. That there are questions, but I'm still going to trust. Then there's the helplessness, that a child, in awe of realizing how big the world is, the kind of terror that a child feels when they are apart from their guardian. You know what I'm saying? Like when I was a kid, I remember my parents left me. We had like a huge family trip we'd make to Iowa every year, and we were in this like resort. And I remember I was in the bathroom, I think, one moment, and I came out and started looking at all the rooms, and everyone was gone. And I was just shocked. I remember just walking down the hallways, just sobbing because I was freaked out because I know how big the world is, and I don't know what I'm gonna do because I realize how small I am. And luckily, my dad comes running back in and finds me and takes me, and I feel comforted again because the person who I trust to handle it all, in the midst of my helplessness, was there. And so that's how we are with God. And finally, it is the amazement that I've been talking about, and I keep using these same words, and I don't want to get redundant, but the amazement, being amazed, should be the natural response that we make to the beauty and majesty of God, right? So if a child knows the splendor... If a child knows to splendor at the sight of creation, so we, as children of God, should stand amazed in the presence of the Creator. right? After all, the world they are mesmerized by, the world children are mesmerized by, exists for the glory of its creator. It is a reflection of that teacher, of that creator, of the one who is in control of all of those things. It merely shows how great God is. And so if they are mesmerized by that, if they are blown away, taken aback, shaken up by a view of creation, so we, knowing who God is, should be in the very same way shaken up, taken aback, in light of and in the presence of our Savior, our Creator, our God, our King. That's the natural response. And so the issue is, what I think is that many times today we do not have this kind of childlike view of the greatness of God. That we think of God as being, it's almost like we humanize him, that we lower his value and his greatness so that we can have a greater understanding of it. But that's the issue, is that we're not supposed to understand God. In fact, that is the splendor. The fact that I say I can't understand God, just like the kid can't understand the expanses of the cosmos or the intricacies and interworkings of an animal that he's never seen before. In the same way, I can say I don't understand God, and that's what makes him so great. That it's okay for me to not understand things. So in response to the expansive nature and the total beauty of God, we don't go, how do I humanize him and make him less so that I can understand him? No, I need to be content in the fact that I can understand him, because that's what makes him God. Who would God be if men could understand him completely? It would make him man-made. And that is why we assert as Christians that God is not man-made, that he is the uncreated, that he is infinite, because I can't understand him. And if I can't understand something that was man-made, then you see what I'm saying? If it was man-made, I'd be able to understand it completely. And so we have to be content in the fact. Don't make a God out of your misunderstanding, right? Don't look and think, oh, I don't understand this God, so I'm going to change things so that it makes more sense to me. No. It is okay to not understand God. We will have eternity to begin to do that, right? And eternity will not be enough for us to be blown away and to gain the knowledge of and understanding of every intricacy of the majesty and the beauty of our God. So I want to ask you a question. 3 questions, 3 rhetorical questions. Ask yourself, are you amazed by God? Does he leave you in awe? And are you thankful to be in his presence? Like, this is the issue, that we just haphazardly enter his presence like we're entitled to it, that we deserve to be in the presence of God, and don't think, man, the holy creator of the universe, who should have nothing to do with me, but because of his mercy he chooses to, is stepping down to be in my presence right now. Like, Jesus decided to come down to the earth. We look at that and think, yeah, of course he did. You know how great I am? No. The response is, wow. I don't understand why he did that, because I wouldn't do the same, but thank God that he did, because I needed that. And that alone should be enough to amaze us. Even if we didn't have the beautiful details that we're going to talk about the physical descriptions we have of God in the throne room, even if we didn't have that, the very actions of Jesus Christ should be enough to leave us in shock forever. Forever. That should be enough. But luckily, we have so much more to be blown away by. I mean, think, when you read the Bible, when you hear sermons, when you worship God, do you not get that, like, your mind blown? Because you should. And if not, you're not reading with a childlike amazement, with a childlike tone, view. We want to read and we want to observe. We want to take God in and think, man, this is amazing. Like, have you been conditioned to think that you deserve him? Have you been conditioned to think that it's not that big of a deal? Every time we enter the presence of God, even in this very moment as we enter his presence, we should be blown away, shocked to think that he would do such a thing for us. That the beautiful, majestic, powerful God of all creation would step down to his creation. And that the Holy Spirit would be in us and among us as we speak. And so my appeal, and we're going to look into these 3 texts, these 3 descriptions given to us, and the 2 from the Old Testament and 1 from the New, about people who saw visions of God in the throne room, and the observations they made and the response they made. And the appeal is for us to understand that we cannot take worship lightly. That we cannot take the presence of God lightly. So we're going to look at Isaiah 6, Ezekiel 1, and Revelation 4. I'm going to read through all. Isaiah 6, we read the observation. Ezekiel 1, we look at the observation. Revelation, same. You get what I'm saying. So Isaiah 6, 1 through 7, we're going to read through all this. So in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord. This is Isaiah writing. I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him stood the seraphim. Each had 6 wings, and with 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. Verse 4. And the foundations of the thresholds shook at the voice of him who called, and the house was filled with smoke. And I said, Woe is me, for I am lost. For I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Verse 6. Then one of the seraphim flew to me, having in his hand a burning coal that he had taken with tongs from the altar. And he touched my mouth and said, Behold, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin atoned for. It's Isaiah 6, 1 through 7. So let's look at the observation that Isaiah gives us, the imagery that he leaves us, this beautiful description of what it was like to see God. He says in verse 1, high and lifted up. High and lifted up. He sees the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up. This is literally just a geographical description of where God was in regards to the rest of the room. Understand, he is high and lifted up. That he is above all. Even the angels that John was clearly that Isaiah was blown away by as he was writing, they are still below him. That he is high and lifted up. And then it says, and the train of his robe filled the temple. That this part of the part of his robe, like the back end that would go down to his feet, wrapped all around and filled the temple. And what exactly that means, is that literal, is that figurative? We don't know, but this speaks so clearly to the expansive glory of God. That the train of his robe, right? You know, when kings would walk down like their red carpets into the castle or whatever, they would wear these super, super long coats. It's like women when they have super long veils. It's the same concept. That these kings would wear these super long coats or these robes that would trail behind them. And people would carry them behind them. And that was the whole point, was it was showing their wealth and their greatness and their worthiness and their power. And his robe did not just train behind him. It filled the temple. He is high and lifted up. And his robe, the train of his robe, filled the temple. Imagine this, John living in a world that is ruled by kings. Kings that would wear beautifully designed robes with long trains and walking in and saying, whoa, I've never seen a king like this before. And he talks about the seraphim, they covered him in worship of him, and how they proclaim constantly, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. Verse 4. And the foundations of the threshold shook at the voice of him who called. The very speaking of God shook the room. It's like when you're in the car and the bass is all the way up and you just feel it going doo, doo, doo. The very voice of God caused the room, the throne room that John stood in, to shake like an earthquake caused by his voice. Let's look at Ezekiel 1. Ezekiel chapter 1, verses 26 through 28. And above, he's describing the throne room and talking about all the creatures he sees, and here's what he writes. And above the expanse, over their heads, there was the likeness of a throne, and the appearance of sapphire. And seated above the likeness of a throne was a likeness with a human appearance. And upward from what had the appearance of his waist, I saw, as it were, gleaming metal, like the appearance of fire enclosed all around. And downward from what had the appearance of his waist, I saw it, as it were, the appearance of fire. and there was brightness around him, like the appearance of the bow that is in the cloud on the day of rain. So was the appearance of the brightness all around. And such was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. And when I saw it, I fell on my face, and I heard the voice of one speaking. Look at this. He's talking about the throne, and the appearance of God was like sapphire. This rich, this valuable gemstone. And then he says that he saw it above his waist. It was like a gleaming metal, this shiny, reflective, valuable metal, and like the appearance of fire all around. And then he talks about below the waist. He says there was, again, fire, and there was brightness all around him, like the appearance of a rainbow all around him. That God himself gives off light. That God himself is shown around with a rainbow. There is color all around him. His appearance is indescribable by human standards. Is he literally on fire? Who knows? We know Ezekiel saw something he could not perfectly declare and describe, that it blew his mind so much that he can only default to describing it as gemstones, as fire, as metal. Think of the beautiful description he gives. It is like a poet describing to a painter what he must draw, what he must make or paint or whatever. And Ezekiel has it before his eyes. And finally, we're going to look at Revelation chapter 1, 12 to 15, and then Revelation chapter 4. This is John, Revelation 1. Then I turned to see the voice that was speaking to me, and on turning I saw 7 golden lampstands. And in the midst of the lampstands, one like a son of man, which is Jesus, clothed with a long robe and a golden sash around his chest. The hairs of his head were white like wool, like snow. His eyes were like a flame of fire. His feet were like burnished bronze, refined in a furnace, and his voice was like the roar of many waters. I want to point out this one part. It says his eyes were like a flame of fire. It is almost as if that you could look into the eyes of Jesus and you could stare into eternity. That as you look into his eyes, they would never end. The hairs of his head were white like wool, like snow. They are a reflective glory, giving off this powerful white light. His feet were like burnished bronze, refined in a furnace, and his voice is like the roar of many waters. Again, the voice, so powerful, it would roar like the mightiness of the ocean. And finally, we're going to look at Revelation 4, verses 2 through 11. At once I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne stood in heaven, with one seated on the throne. And he who sat there had the appearance of jasper and carnelian. And around the throne there was a rainbow that had the appearance of an emerald. Around the throne were 24 thrones, and seated on the thrones were 24 elders, clothed in white garments, with golden crowns on their heads. From the thrones came flashes of lightning, and rumblings, and pearls of thunder. And before the throne were burning 7 torches of fire, which are the 7 spirits of God. And before the throne there was as it were a sea of glass like crystal. And around the throne and each side of the throne are 4 living creatures, full of eyes in front and behind. The first living creature like a lion, the second living creature like an ox, the third with the face of a man, and the fourth like an eagle in flight. And the 4 living creatures, each of them with 6 wings, are full of eyes all around and within, and day and night they never cease to say, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. Who was and is to come. And whenever the living creatures give glory and honor and thanks to him who is seated on the throne, who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before him who is seated on the throne and worship him who lives forever and ever. They cast down their crowns before the throne, saying, Worthy are you, O Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power. For you created all things, and by your will they existed and were created. I want to go back to verse 3. It says, And he who sat there had the appearance of jasper and carnelian, and around the throne there was a rainbow that had the appearance of an emerald. So we see this connection back to the description given to us in Ezekiel, where he's relating it to gemstones. And what most people agree on this, and what they say the same as Ezekiel, is that they didn't have the words or the language to properly describe the majesty that they saw, so they defaulted to using beautiful, valuable, rich, rare gemstones that only the richest had. that were regarded worldwide as beautiful, as valuable, as priceless. And he has the appearance of it, of jasper and carnelian. And then he was surrounded by this array of colorful light, like an emerald, like a rainbow. And then from the throne came flashes of lightning and rumblings and pearls of thunder and peals of thunder. I mean, that should shock you as you read this. As you read all three of these chapters, you can go through and see how much time they spend simply describing the throne room that was meant to display the glory of God. That should be enough to blow you away. And Ezekiel, the first 25 verses are simply describing the room that God was in. Because it was that beautiful, because it was where God was. That should blow you away. These observations are amazing. That God is so majestic and beautiful that man can use no proper words to describe him in adequacy. There is no adequate description of the God of all creation. There's none. There's none. We do not possess the words to express this. I could sit here for the next 24 hours explaining the beauty and the majesty of God displayed from the first page to the last page of the Bible, and it would still not be enough. I would still not be able to properly, to carefully, to intricately, and to completely and totally convey that what is the beauty and glory of our God. And it is this that we will splendor after, that we will celebrate, that we will worship in heaven forever. And daily we will come to a deeper understanding of this very glory. For all of eternity, and eternity will not be enough. Eternity will not be enough to learn the perfection of God. So look at these observations. It means there are men who are existing in the real world like you and I, that were chosen to come up and to see this throne room. And the descriptions they make. Understand the reason it's so confusing is because they're confused too. I mean, they're looking at something they've never seen anything like it. Nothing. You could do a tour of all of creation. You could walk through the Louvre. You could go through a planetarium. You could travel in space. You could go to the depths of the ocean of which we have not explored. You could go through the jungles. You could do any of it. And I promise you, you will never encounter anything this beautiful. You will never encounter anything this great. This mesmerizing. There is nothing so majestic as God. And so those are the observations, but what is the response? What is the response of these men as they view the very physical manifestation of God? Let's look at Ezekiel, or Isaiah, I mean. We already read it in verse 5. He says, "Woe is me! Cursed! I am cursed, for I am lost. For I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips, for my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts." Isaiah comes into the presence of God, and he sees him, and he doesn't go, "Oh man, I'm so good that God chose to bring me here." He says, "No." He stands in the mighty, holy, glorious presence of God and says, "Wow, I am wicked. I am a sinner. I am lost. I am unclean." That's the response to seeing the beauty and majesty and holiness of the God of all creation is, "I am truly lost. I am wicked. I am sinful. I am a man of much iniquity." It is not to puff himself up. It is to say, "I am shocked. I'm a wicked man." And look at Ezekiel. Verse 28. "And when I saw it, I fell on my face." When Ezekiel enters the mighty presence of God, he doesn't take it like a joke. He doesn't take it haphazardly. He falls to his face. This is an act of massive humility where he falls before God on his knees after seeing this beautiful array of the God of all creation. And then finally we look at Revelation. And when John talks about the 24 elders, which are regarded basically as the 12 apostles and the 12 tribes of Israel, that's one idea. That's the one I mostly subscribe to. It's symbolic. But when we read it, it says, "And whenever the living creatures give glory and honor and thanks to him who is seated on the throne, who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before him who is seated on the throne and worship him who lives forever and ever. They cast their crowns before the throne." I hope that I have conveyed it well. That when you enter the presence of God, it's no joke. It's not something to be taken lightly, because look at the observation and look at the response. They see God, and in response, they are humbled, they are shocked, they are amazed. This is essentially the verse that summarizes everything that I've said. 1 Chronicles 16:29. "Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. Bring an offering and come before him. Worship the Lord in the splendor of holiness." I mean, that's it. That's it. Don't take your worship lightly. When you have the chance and the opportunity to come into the presence of God, do you think, I don't really like the songs tonight, or the songs this morning, or the sermon this morning wasn't that good? Like, you were in the presence of God. And what is your complaint? There is no greater honor than to be in the presence of God. And so when you are, do not think of your greatness. Do not fall to pride. But think as a child and be shocked that the Holy Spirit, that is the God that these men are describing, the one that they fell before as they saw him, the one whose voice shook the very thresholds of the room. Think and consider that God is not only inside you, but he is moving in the room. And in response, you should be nothing but amazed.